So thank you for joining. We're so grateful to have Dr. Gal Zohar here with us today. Dr. Zohar is head of research and policy at the Israeli Public Employment Services. This is a government corporation that collects and analyzes labor market data and trends to inform government policy and regulation. And it supports placement of training of registered unemployed in Israel via nationwide employment service bureaus and in cooperation with other employment agencies. And it also helps unemployed individuals access financial benefits and assistance in cooperation with the National Insurance Institute. So as you can imagine, Dr. Zohar's, the department's data and insights are in great demand these days. So we're so grateful that he has kindly agreed to walk us through the latest data and its implications regarding Arab unemployment, both within the context of broader economic trends as well as the corona economic crisis. Because of the high demand for Zoom calls, and we've gotten a lot of requests for recording of this call. So we are recording it and it will be shared. Please keep this in mind. If whatever makes you more comfortable, we have a small group, so you're welcome to ask questions by unmuting yourself and speaking. Or you can use the chat function, or feel free to email me. Dr. Zohar will present for about 50 minutes. That's including the presentation and the Q&A. After this, we'll have 25 minutes reserved for discussion as needed. And at this time, I would really welcome thoughts regarding which focus areas raised by this discussion or otherwise would be most useful to everyone for upcoming calls. Anyone joining just by phone can't see the screen. Michelle will share a PDF of the presentation by email. If you want one anyway to follow along at your own pace, please just chat and she will do so. Dr. Zohar, with no further ado, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Liron. Okay, so I'll try to present. Just a second, I'll try to share my screen again. Just to make sure it's working. Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, okay, I'm the head of research and policy at the Israeli Public Employment Services. I was actually started my career at the JDC Israel for about 10 years. So I'm quite familiar with the work of on the diaspora, of course. What I'll try to present during this this presentation is about the data and the analysis we know about the situation in Israel right now. Israel, like in the United States and other countries, actually, the situation is in many aspects it's quite similar. In other aspects, it's different. And I'll try to say a few words about the situation in Israel as a whole, and afterwards about the Arab population in Israel, because in order to understand the situation among the Arab population in Israel, you need to understand the story of Israeli society during the last three since the beginning of this of the coronavirus. So first of all, I would like to present a bit context for the situation. And what I'm presenting here, you can see the data between 2002 until 2016. But you see, in all aspects of society, there's actually an increase in the employment rates among populations in Israel, including Jews and Arabs, women and men. I can also say a few words about people with disabilities, etc. But there's actually, in contrast to other countries, the situation in 2008 was a bit different in Israel. We haven't had this kind of a crisis, I think, since 2002 to 2003 in Israel. And in order to understand what happened in Israel, the first thing I'm trying to present is the context for this situation. And you can, as you can see here on the data, the Israeli employment rate actually was rising throughout all of the 15 years, last 15 years. And we can see it until a short time before the coronavirus got Israel and other countries. before I'll say a few words about the situation in Israel, this is the data that I'm actually in this chart. I'm looking at this chart since the beginning of this crisis. And every morning I open my eyes, I just like see this analysis about the 2008 economic recession. And this is the data among the OECD countries. And it says actually that in order to, after this crisis, it took 6 years or 8 years or 9 years actually to recover and to gain the same numbers of unemployment and long-term unemployment. And to the situation it was before the crisis. So at the beginning of the incidence of the coronavirus in Israel and other countries, and we're trying to understand what happens in former crises in order to understand the context, the global context, and the historical context for this event. And at the beginning, we didn't understand how the problem is. The problem was we didn't anticipate this kind of data at the beginning, like you can see here. And I'll try to say a few words about the economic dimension of this pandemic and to give it a general outlook about the situation in Israel. And as you can see here, this is what we have here. This is the job seekers in Israel. This is the job seekers that are actually registered at the Israel Employment Services and the National Insurance Institute. And like in the States, you see the numbers and...
Gal, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. I'm having, the audio for me is coming in and out. Are other people having a hard time hearing, or is it just me?
I'm also in and out.
I've been fine.
You've been fine?
I've had in and out.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to resolve it. Maybe everyone has to mute so that we can just have Gal's audio. Gal, I don't know. Maybe it's just a matter of speaking a little bit slowly, and I'll signal you if we can't hear you, or if we need to repeat.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, I'll try to say a few things about the situation in Israel now. And as you can see here, we have this data from June 2017, and we have this number since the beginning of the last decade. And the data is like, we never had this kind of, so many people are unemployed, registered unemployed in Israel, job seekers in Israel since 2002. And as you can see, at the high levels of this crisis in April, the middle of April, we've had almost 1,200,000 people that are unemployed in Israel and filed for unemployment. And the situation is quite similar to the States in that sense, because the whole labor force in Israel was about 4 million. Which means that we've had almost 30% of unemployment at the records of in Israel, registered unemployment in Israel. Ever since then, we already know that about 350,000 people registered back to work, and they came back to work. The data we have here is only about May. So in the last few weeks, we've had another 100,000 people that actually said that they came back to work, but still we have too many people are unemployed. And in the situation now in Israel that many of them will stop receiving the benefits within a few weeks because they're going to end their entitlement period. So, but the situation here is quite alarming. We didn't anticipate this kind of numbers. And I think none of the countries, I've actually looked into many countries, none of them, though none of the countries actually believe that these numbers are real at the beginning. And in part it's true because some countries already have less people are unemployed, but in the States and in Israel, I think two countries which the highest number of job seekers. And the interesting thing, and that we hear that before the crisis, the situation in Israel was one of the best situation in Israel within the last 15, 20 years. And within only 1 month, the situation has worsened much more than we anticipated. And still, we have too many people are unemployed in Israel. And the discussion here in Israel is whether we are going to have a V-shaped recovery or a W-shaped recovery, or it's going to be a long-term shaped recovery. Actually, all the scenarios are actually true, because we know that when the labor market was open, when the Israeli market was open for business again, many people came back to work. We already know about 350,000 people that registered, as I said earlier. But at the same time, we might standing at the beginning of the new wave of the coronavirus, which means that more people will stay unemployed. And the recovery will take some time. And we're going to see higher numbers of unemployment again, not at this high, because now Israel is actually trying to, and the government and all of the ministries are trying to think about the ways to assist these unemployed people and to get ready for the second wave if it's going to hit Israel again. But at the same time, we finally understand that it's going to take a long time until full recovery. And full recovery might take a few years. It's not going to end this year. It might take 2 or 3 or 4 years until this situation is totally over. And of course, it depends on whether there's a vaccine for the COVID-19. What you can see here, this is the highest number we've had. And at the beginning of this crisis, this is the 15th of March, 2020, we had about more than 100,000 people registered in one day at register for unemployment in Israel. And the numbers are more than 200,000 within a few days. And Israel has decided to put people on temporary unemployment, on the furlough, but because it was the easiest way to do it and to assist people that are being unemployed, and it's encouraged employers, and it's that because of the curfew, they cannot work, so people will have to stay home. And the government thought this is that was the best and the easiest way. It has implication for a long term. But as you can see here, and the highest number were actually before May, about the 20th of May, when the market was open. And since then, we can see people are coming back to work already, but we still have highest number of people. What you can see here are the numbers of the new job seekers. And for now, we're standing for more than 900, almost 900,000 people that are being unemployed and registered at the Israeli public employment services, which means that in some populations are not entitled for benefits. So the real unemployment is actually higher than what we can see it right now because of all small businesses owner. They didn't have this kind of assistant to assist their workers. And some of them are not entitled for benefits. So these are the numbers. And as you can see, since the beginning of May, we can see this, the numbers are dropping at a slower pace than we anticipated. And we actually expected that until the end of August, we'll have about 450,000 people that are still going to be unemployed. And before the crisis, the number were about 160. So in order to understand the situation in Israel, you need to understand this context and about the Arab situation, about the Arab population in Israel. And what we can see here at the back to work on 31st of May, we know that people that were on unemployment insurance, about 20% of the people came back to work during all of the month of May. Although the market was open, the businesses were open again at a slower pace, and except for a few sectors, which is quite similar to the United States in that sense. But on the other hand, as you can see on the income support, and I'll say a few words about this income support, you can see only 5.2% said that they came back to work. And the problem with this income support, this long-term unemployment and social benefits, that it's going to take a long time to recover. People that are actually being moved actually from unemployment insurance to income support, they have much more difficult times to go back to work. And we need to take that into consideration because we anticipate that more and more people will go into income support because they lose their entitlement for unemployment insurance after a while. And it's been more than 3 months now since the beginning of this pandemic. And young adults, for instance, most of them actually going to finish their entitlement within a few weeks. Some of them already used their entitlements, but the government decided to have this grace of another month, and so people are still entitled for benefits, but it's going to be over soon. And there's a big dilemma whether to assist people that are still being unemployed. And in contrast to the United States, the government wasn't encouraging people to go back to go on the unemployment benefit, and the benefits stay the same. So the furlough actually it's almost the same as the real unemployment. So we have to take that into consideration when we're talking about the furlough in Israel. So, okay, the numbers, you can see the numbers here?
Yes, we can, on screens we can see them. If it's on a phone, it might be tricky, but people can move you.
So when we talk about our population in Israel during this COVID-19, we know that since the beginning of the incidents in 15th of March, and a few days earlier actually, we have almost 900,000 people, Jews and others, that actually registered as new job seekers in Israel, and in addition to 200,000 Arabs since the beginning of this crisis. And as you can see, the numbers here are not so clear, but if you talk about the Arab population and the Arab labor market, which is consisted of people that are working and people that look for jobs, then the Arab population at these ages were about 660. So it's almost third of
660,000 within the employment range. Age range, or employed, or in the age of employment?
No, it's both. It's when you take this labor market, it's included the people that are actually working and that register as working, and people are registered as job seekers. We don't talk about the whole population, but all the population that actually on the working age, but are working or looking for a job.
Thank you.
Okay. And you see the Jewish and other populations in Israel, it's more than 3 million. But what we can see is that when we talk about our population, and as you can see it soon, this coronavirus actually took more people from our population at later stages of this pandemic. And these are the numbers here, just to have this clear picture about what happened in Israel. The situation before the crisis in February, there were about 25,000 people that registered each month. During March itself, almost 900,000 people were registered within only a few weeks. and people were trying to register, not so, it didn't took much time, longer time to register as unemployment, but it did took long time for people to get their benefits. And some of the people only got their benefits during the last few days, but they'll get their benefits at the end. But what you can see here from, and in contrast to the Arab population, more of the Jews actually registered as unemployed at the earlier stages of this crisis. And you can see it in March 2020, that the Arab population was only 17% that were registered as unemployed, while in April, the situation has changed dramatically in that sense, that more and more people that were laid off because of this pandemic. And our population that were registered during the month of April was about 25%, which is a lot higher than what happened in March. In May, we actually came back to regular numbers in that sense, but we need to take into consideration that while people came back to work since April 19th, while businesses were open, that 300,000 people registered as and said that they came back to work. More than 120,000 people said that they lose their job after the market was open. So in order to...
Do you mean they went from furlough to layoff?
Some of them went from furlough to layoff, but more people were laid off even after the businesses were open. So we know that the situation, it's not just that the businesses were open and people came back to work. More and more businesses actually saying they have problems to hire people and they had to lay off people or to send them to furlough. Usually the problem in Israel is you have to have this decision within the employees and the employers about specific dates that you have to go back to work. At this time, the Israeli government decided that the furlough will be without any time limits, which means that people can stay on furlough for a longer time, but furlough in that sense is exactly the same as unemployment. Which means that you have the time limits that you have on unemployment is exactly the same as you have on furlough, which means that if you are registered as a furlough, for instance, then after 6 months you lose your entitlement, you won't be able to claim another unemployment benefit because you used your time on furlough. So this is the situation right now in Israel. And as I said before, more and more people from the Arab population were actually laid off, more than people that went on furlough. And we can see this at almost all ages. And one of the things we're actually trying to understand what happens with different age groups. And in that sense, when you look at the Arab population, and it's quite typical for the labor market to behave this way in Israel for the last few decades, that younger people from the Arab communities are actually going into work at early stages of their life and leave the labor market at the earlier stages of their life. And as you can see here, if we talk about the whole population, about 47.5% are young adults until the age of 34. But among the Arab populations, which we can see that it's more than 56%, which means we need to take a closer look at what happened with young adults. And we know the situation with young adults is very complex, and it's not a new phenomenon for people from young adults among all populations that struggle to understand their role in life. And we know that our career is actually building between the age of 20 and 30. And if people, young adults, are not working or working in underemployment scenarios, so they won't be able to advance in their career for later stages of life. So taking care about young adults is very important, especially when you check the higher prevalence of people from the Arab communities that are being laid off, which this situation is quite alarming in that sense. We know there was a problem before the crisis, but the crisis actually intensified the situation and worsened the problems and the challenges young adults are facing, not just in Israel, actually, it's all around the world, the same situation. What we are trying to see during most of our analysis during the last few months was also to check what happens to localities and to try to understand what happens to different populations in Israel. And what the Israel Employment Services is trying to do right now is trying to work more with the localities to understand what happened in each localities, and each situation is different in different localities. What we can see here. Second. What we can see here is that when you look at the higher rates of unemployment, the unemployment rates of the registered unemployment rates, in contrast to the Central Bureau of Statistics, which is based on survey, these numbers are actually people that are registered at the Public Employment Services and the National Insurance Institute in Israel, at the Bituach Leumi. And what we can see here, among the highest cities and localities with high numbers are few groups. There are people, the ultra-Orthodox, as you can see here, Beitar Elite, Modi'in Elite, etc. You can see here cities like Tiberia and Eilat, which are based actually on tourism. Because tourism has different problems of they're not able to work, and the businesses are actually not working and not function. They're not functioning anymore, at least or partially. So we know, and we can see cities and localities that actually based on tourism that will have problems to more difficult times in order to recover. But at the same time, what you can see here are the red with red letters is that you can see that among all of the localities, most of them are part of the Arab population, which means that the higher rates of unemployment we can see among the Arab population in Israel. And this is quite an alarming situation again. And we have here only localities over 25,000 people. But if we'll take all localities over 10,000 people, you can see many more villages among the Arab population that are actually on the left scale of this graph, of this chart, which means that the challenges among the Arab population in Israel is much more complex than in contrast to the Jewish communities. And another alarming thing was this one. This is the self-reports of people that decided that they're going back to work, that they said that they already came back to work. And as you can see here among the Jews, the 20% during the month of May said that they came back to work. And in contrast, you can see that among the Arab population, only 9% actually declared that they came back to work. And we don't really know, not yet, whether it's because they haven't declared that they came back to work, or because of the Ramadan, which took place during the month of May. But if you see this number, it's quite an alarming to see that many Arab workers still out of the labor market in contrast to the Jewish population, and the Jewish population also has difficulties. So only 22,000 people declare they came back to work. We can see a little bit different numbers during the last few days. More Arab actually declared that they came back to work during the last few weeks. But still, the gap between the Jews and the Muslims, Druze and Christians, Arab in Israel, is the gap is quite wide right now. So this the situation. We need to take a close look at the situation. We're trying to develop the exact tools to assist the population, but it's going to take a while until we'll find a way to assist all people. And as I said earlier at the beginning of this presentation, it takes a long time to put people back to work again. So if people are already out of work for more than 3.5 months, and most of them will stay there until August and September, 6 months out of work, it's a very, very long time. And as we know that as long as time passes, it will be much more difficult to put people back to work. So that's the reason that at the early stages of in April, we said to the government, we told to the government, we need to assist people to go back to work as soon as possible. Every minute counts, but still not many people came back to work. But we're trying to push the government to assist and to develop the program as soon as possible in order to assist this population, to identify who are the people that might won't go back to work and need more assistance. Just to say a few words about East Jerusalem and the Negev Bedouin, during the crisis, 28,000 among the Arab population in East Jerusalem actually registered as unemployed, and the Negev Bedouin for 1,200 people, new registers. And what you can see here, and this is something that we're trying to understand, the phase that people came back or registered as unemployed. What you can see here that if you compare all the population, you can see a quite different scenario for the Arab population as a whole, for the whole Arab populations. And East Jerusalem actually behave almost the same as all of the Arabs in Israel. But if you take a close look at the Negev Bedouin, you cannot see these numbers here sometimes, but it's only 83% were actually on furlough, in contrast to 89%, which means that people from among the Bedouins, they were actually laid off, or and other reasons, and not on furlough, which means that they'll have much more difficult times to go back to work. And you can see exactly the same picture, the same thing here. What we have here is the unemployment and the income support. Income support is for people that actually are not entitled for unemployment anymore in other cases. And if you can see, again, the Arabs...
Is income support welfare? Is that what that is? Just
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the income support. Those people are on welfare, of course. And what you can see here, again, with the Negev Bedouin, is that many more people are on income support. And they had this problem at earlier stages, of course, but when we look at this, the pandemic and the COVID-19 pandemic during the last few months, we can see that more and more people are already laying on the income support, which we need to take a close watch again on this Negev Bedouin and to understand what happens to them. And if they're not coming back to work, it will be much more difficult. And we know that in usual time, during May, we usually have about 100,000 open jobs in Israel. And now during May, we've had only 27,000 available jobs, which means that the businesses are not open yet totally. And if people are actually go from unemployment to income support, they will stay in income support, and it will be much more difficult to place them back to work again. So we need a more focused intervention in regard to the Bedouin, and this number is actually what we're trying. I'm not presenting all of the numbers, of course, here, but we can see these numbers in other aspects among the Bedouin, with the young, with the income they've had before the situation, and they face more difficult times and more severe times ahead of them, more than the other populations. And as I said earlier, the Arabs in Israel as a whole and the East Jerusalem actually behaving almost the same, although you can see smaller differences, but they behave almost the same during this crisis. So when we are trying to consider all of this situation in Israel, we're trying to think about what are the next policy directions ahead of us. And that's why we keep on tracking to see the context within which this COVID-19 took us by surprise or not by surprise. In other countries, they had this. They were much more prepared in many aspects. But what I will try to show you that this situation here, what happened during the COVID, is actually not a new phenomenon, but it's intensified the situation we are facing right now. And what you can see here during these numbers from the Central Bureau of Statistics, the red lines here are the unemployment. So what you can see here between 2000 and 2017, and it's also took place in 2018 and 2019, but I don't have the numbers here, that you can see that the unemployment rates were actually declined. While we talk about them, and the blue dots here, the purple dots here, are the employment rates. You can see that among all of the population during these years, the population rates were actually higher in Israel. But when we add to the situation the economically inactive, and I mentioned a few words about young adults, what you can see here from the ages of 35 to 64, the economically inactive, which are people that actually not registered as unemployed anymore, and usually people that are not on employment, not on education, not on training, what we call NEET, not education and training. So what we can see, people at the ages of 35 and until 64, we can see decrease in the numbers. But while we focus here on the age of 18 to 24 and 25 to 34, you can see actually there's an increase in the numbers here. So if you can see, the whole situation is actually during these years, the situation has become better for most of the population. But if you look at these young adults until the age of 34, you can see more and more people are actually not part of the labor market and are actually being excluded from the Israeli society. And this happens in all parts of the society, not just among the Arab population. But the alarming thing was that the situation, the difficult times ahead of young adults actually took place before the crisis started. So the crisis intensified the situation. As I said earlier, we've had during the crisis about 47, almost 48% were young adults, in comparison to only 40% before the crisis, which means that the situation was worsened and intensified for these young adults. So we need to take close look at these young adults and to see, and as you can see in the whole Israeli population as a whole, you can see two groups. More and more people are being actually included during the last few years and part of the society, and where the inclusion rates were actually higher. But at the same time, more and more people, especially among young adults, were actually getting out of the labor market, and they're not working, they're not studying, and we need to take close watch on these numbers. And if you want us to see the differences between the groups, what we can see here is that during the last 15 years, you can see the unemployment rates among the Jewish population was actually lower, and you can see two groups in Israel as well. This is the economically inactive, and this is on this bar, the brown bar here. You can see that the employment rates were actually were higher. But if you take these two groups and you can sketch them down to see their population, you see that the differences between these two groups is different than what we can see. Two different groups, which most of the people among the Jewish communities and the Jewish and Jewish as a whole are being part of the society. The employment rates were higher. And you can see two different groups, which are not similar. But if you take a close look at the Arabs, the employment rates, the employment of population, and the economically inactive, you can see that although all the society is actually being divided into two groups, but the situation for the Arab Israel is different. So the two groups altogether, there's towards stronger inclusion on one hand, on the other towards greater exclusion. And this situation it's not a new phenomenon, as I keep saying. And one of the alarming thing, and I will finish within a few minutes, and this is the PIAC exam. This is an international survey that actually we're trying to compare between countries with the skills people have. And what you can see here in Israel, that Israel is the rates for Israel among these surveys were actually lower than the OECD average. If we excluded our population and the ultra-Orthodox, Israel is only at the average of the OECD countries, which means that we need to take a few steps in order to extend and to have higher, to extend what we're doing with encouraging people to go back to work. And then basically what we are saying here is that we keep talking about the future of work. During the last few years, you can see it all around. Israel is talking about the future of work, what happened within a few months, within a few years, until 2030. And in order to get ready for this future of work, you need skills, you need abilities. And if you see Israel in contrast to other countries, then we haven't developed our skills at the higher rates as we should have. And that's one of the challenges we are facing. And Israel needs to enhance its human capital. So, and this crisis actually, we're facing difficult choices, because on one hand, we need to prioritize rapid reintegration, which means that in contrast to what we said during the last 15 years, that we talk, and if you know the labor market in Israel, we talked about career for low earners, to advance their human capital, to focus on a career. But this situation, one of the main challenges of Israel is to assist people to reintegrate to the labor market as soon as possible. But at the same time, while you integrate into the labor market, you might face an underemployment situation and higher numbers of working poor. We actually anticipate that this situation will happen, and as we see it all around the world, it will happen in Israel as well. And the goal here is to assist people to be placed in the labor market as soon as possible. But at the same time, Israel and other countries looking in investing in the human capital development, which might be translated into a long-term unemployment and associated scaring effects of the labor market and the labor market detachment, which means that we actually need to find a way to integrate between these two alleged contested goals. On one hand, we need to assist people to go back to work, but at the same time, we need to advance their skills. And sometimes it's these goals are actually contested, and we need to find a way to combine, to integrate between these two goals. Because if we go only on placement, then it might lead to underemployment and working poor, and vice versa. If you focus only on human capital enhancement, it might lead to long-term unemployment. So what we're trying to do is working together with the government, with other entities of the government, the Israeli Employment Services, of course, and all other services. This is the gateway for inclusion or exclusion. We need a coordinated policy and balance between these priorities and working together to achieve these common goals. And one of the problems in Israel, while you look at the institutional landscape, many entities, government entities, and foundations are actually working to assist all of the people to go back to work and to assist in enhancing their skills. But we need a much more coordinated policy in order to balance between these priorities and to assist so many people that are actually staying out of work. And this is quite an essential. We really need to find a way to assist people and to assist people to go back to work as soon as possible. And we know that the situation might. But so we know the situation, we know that the situation is much more difficult at these times because of the COVID-19, and we need to think about the right ways to assist people, vocational training, to find ways to modernize our vocational training institution and our active labor market programs at the same time. And tough choices in very, very complex time. But on the positive side, so many organizations and high-level professionals, and I've met so many professionals around the world. I do believe in the high-skilled professionals in Israel to assist people to go back to work and find a way to get out of this crisis as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was a lot of data, and we're at 12:50. Gal, may we have you for another 10 minutes for Q&A? Okay. There's a question from Robert Gordon in the chat. If you can explain, why does investment in human capital lead to long-term unemployment?
What?
Yep.
Okay.
Now we can hear you. I thought we lost you.
We know that while people are staying on vocational training for longer terms, it's very, very difficult to go back to work. Usually, during the 80s, for instance, there were a lot of vocational training in Israel and in other countries, and people were going and transfer from one vocational training to the other. And the thing is about vocational training that you cannot keep track of the labor market, and the labor market keep advancing all at the same time. While you're out of work, the labor market is keep on advancing. and you need to learn more and more skills. While you're staying in training for a very long time, it's very difficult to go back to work. Well, especially for a few populations that we know which are facing much more difficult times. But while you're staying on vocational training for a very long time, it's very difficult to go back to work, and sorry, that's the reason we need to find a way to actually assist people to stay in work, because as everyone knows, if you'll stay out of work for more than 1 year, it's very, very difficult to go back to work. It's very, very difficult for all of us. If I'll stay out of work for 1 year or for 2 years, it will be very difficult for me to go back to work. And everyone might face this situation because the labor market keep on advancing. While we're out of work for 1 year, new techniques, new orders, new mechanisms are being in place, and we need to advance also in our skills. But at the same time, as I said earlier, if you're if you're going to work and without the proper skills, you'll stay working poor, and you won't be able to advance your career for the next phases of your life.
There may be people in the room who also have a lot of experience in this. I'm curious if you are familiar with why this kind of training has to be while people are not in the job market, what is more effective. And then I also understand that there are challenges engaging Arab citizens in vocational training programs. And I open this both to you and to people in the room if you have experience with this.
What we know is that, can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure. So there's two parts. One is why is it exclusive? Why is effective on the job professional development training have to be while people are not working? And two, about challenges integrating Arab citizens into vocational training and professional development programs.
Okay. Most of the vocational training schemes were actually to allow people to work at the same time while they're being part of the labor market. But the government is actually, they prioritize to assist people that are not working. So the best way was to put people back to work, but then again, after a few months that they're working, to advance their vocational training. But if they're already working, the government won't prioritize to assist these people because they already work. That's one thing. And in regard to all the workers, all their population, when they are citizens, there's not enough training that actually is suitable for all the workers in Israel as a whole, but especially for low-skilled populations. And we still need to adapt to changes and to change the way we work with vocational training, to have it more localized and not just from Jerusalem. Because if you talk about vocational training from Jerusalem, you can see one picture. But if you go to one of the villages in the north, you can see different situations sometimes. And we need to localize our efforts in order to make this vocational training more effective and more adapted to different populations. Among them are older workers from the Arab communities.
So you're speaking a lot about both government subsidies and subsidized programs and government-run programs. And this gets back to what you raised before, which is the fact that there are numerous placement and training programs, some in recent years focused in Arab society. And what would it take, getting back to your idea of a coordinated policy to get out of recovery, what would it take to engage those non-government platforms so that you're working towards the same goals? And is that a goal?
Yeah, but I do think that the government prioritize, and you can see it in most of the countries actually, prioritize to put people back to work as soon as possible. While doing that, sometimes we put other populations, disadvantaged populations on the side. And if you talk about philanthropy, for instance, and foundations, they might work on things that the government won't do, because the government will prioritize to work on, to assist people to go back to work. The government is actually building a quite large program, quite a broad program to advance vocational training, but every program, there's a pros and cons. And when you understand the situation with the vocational training institutions in Israel, you can always find spots that it's kind of blind for the government to do. And there are a few places and few fields that the philanthropy and the organizations, foundations, etc., and even businesses can go and to achieve what the government can't do. And in order to have it more effective, to work with businesses at the same time, to make sure that people will find jobs at the end of this vocational training. And the government will take these disadvantages of the market and allow people to learn and to have this lifelong learning during these years, during this training, in order to assist people to go back to work. And the way I see it is like, we need to work together, all of the government, businesses, and the third sector as well, to have this kind of coordinated efforts in order to get out of this crisis, because it will take efforts from all sides of the situation here in Israel. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. We are very close to 1 o'clock. Is there any question from the room before we let Dr. Zohar go? I think you've opened up a lot of avenues of concern, a lot of avenues for curiosity. And what I want to then engage any of the audiences who wish to stay on for a couple of minutes is which threads we want to pursue in future calls and what study would be relevant for us. But thank you for this overview. It was so thorough and so contextualized. And I know there's significantly more data that we had to cut out and not put in just to make it digestible. We will share this call and hopefully you'll be open to speaking with us again.
Of course, thank you. If you have more questions, feel free to ask. I'm available for any questions.
You know I will.
Thank you. There will be. There definitely will be.
Great. Okay.